Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk today. Today, I'm going to talk about my Windows SecureBoot bug counting journey, what makes the breaches to boot into, how I found these bugs, and what should a normal user do to keep your safety. I'm Andrew Yang from CyberKunlun, a new generation cyberspace security company that focuses on software and system security. I've been passionate about Windows operating system for years and began my journey as a Windows security researcher 4 years ago. Prior to that, I was a versatile CTF player capable of tackling almost any type of challenge. This is my first time speaking at Black Hat. It's a pleasure to be presenting at this stage. We'll first start with some background information, such as what is SecureBoot, what sets my research apart from previous studies, and I'll introduce my approach to reduce duplicate reports based on and introduce some basic knowledge to understand the vulnerabilities in bootloader. Then we'll dive into multiple attack surfaces where I found vulnerabilities and examine case studies for the attack surface. After that, I'll tell you how I managed to set up Fuzzing framework in UEFI environment. And we'll then see what's the attack surface beyond the bootloader. Finally, it's our summary and takeaway session. Before we dive into SecureBoot technical detail, let me share why this research began. As a security researcher, we are instantly drawn by uncharted territories. And Windows SecureBoot, it was a perfect storm of three factors: the throne of unknown, foundational importance, and the reality factor. This combination made it an attractive target. If you can't trust boot process itself, no higher layer security matters. So SecureBoot, to my understanding, is using digital signature and certs to establish a chain from trust from the hardware to OS. You can see it everywhere. For mobile phones, lockout implementations such as iBoot and lead kernel, various of implementation locks the device to only run the vendor's trust code, which often is the bootloader and operating system read by the hardware vendor. On PC platform, the OS vendor is often not hardware vendor. With UEFI standard, it can bring SecureBoot feature into PC platform. Mobile platform is much closer to our daily life and hold up more of our privacy data. So you can see every mobile phone has SecureBoot by default. It's too important that if you try to break the SecureBoot of mobile phone, it will alert you that the phone cannot be trusted. In Windows operating system, there are small features required the SecureBoot to be enforced in recent years. But to be honest, there are still a long way to go for PC platform. As there are too many hardware manufacturers, it's hard work to let every hardware manufacturer devote effort into it. Returning to our top title, booting into SecureBoot breaches. So what makes the breaches? The first thing you need to know is that all my findings were still exploitable by default right now on PC platforms through network. This is mainly because PCA 2011 certs is default in UEFI standard and used by countless motherboard manufacturer and virtualization platform. It won't get expired until 2026. Its predecessor is already deployed on Windows machines through Windows Update by default. But the PCA 2011 is not added into blacklist var because of compatibility issue, which Bill from MSRC explained in last year's Black Hat talk. And there's also length limitation on the UEFI blacklist var. So all these conditions enable the first breaches for this Windows SecureBoot vulnerabilities to be exploited, the time breaches. Let's give a glance at previous research on Windows SecureBoot. You can see that they primarily focus on attack surfaces that require local or physical access to the system. And in past 10 years, there's only 8 CVEs about Windows SecureBoot. Quite small number compared to other Windows components, right? And in this only 8 CVE list, there's 2 famous attacks with its own name. The most famous CVEs are 2 used by Black Lotus bootkit malware. Here's a public CVE acknowledged list issued by MSRC to my finding. You can see that my findings are really large volume compared to previous research, and they are exploitable through network. To today, I have found nearly 60% of SecureBoot secure feature bypass in Windows operating system in last 10 years. Sometimes I look at my research and wonder, does this actually matter? Is it making any difference? Then I see feedback like this. And I remember why I keep pushing forward. Right here is a few. Why are these vulnerabilities can be exploited through network? Here I bring your attention to a protocol named PXE, the pre-boot execution environment. The PXE is a standardized client-server model enabling network booting. Unlike the 9 vulnerabilities identified in the Pixie field attack discovered by Coxlab, the vulnerabilities found in my research are easier to exploit, with their complexity not very real based on firmware vendor. So with so many secure feature bypass vulnerabilities, you must have questions. What are these vulnerabilities about? MSRC explained to me that before SecureBoot, Microsoft doesn't acknowledge vulnerabilities in bootloader. With SecureBoot, bootloader issue can get a CVE. So SecureBoot is a secure feature of Windows. So vulnerabilities in SecureBoot are secure feature bypass. So it can be remote, it can be without user interaction, it can be pre-auth, it can be remote code execution or information leak, but it can't be denial of service. They don't think it's a security issue. So about the impact of my finding, it could be used to attack most of PC with UEFI SecureBoot enabled, regardless of the operating system running on the platform. But in real-world cases, primarily it's Linux and Windows. Usually, these two systems will need reboot quite often, and there's many environments leveraging diskless environment, which use PXE as default boot option. That environment is under real risk, by default risk. So the attack could be driven by BYOB, bring your own bootloader. Here's the summary of my research result. During research period, I have submitted 15 file reports to MSRC detailing various vulnerabilities identified within Microsoft SecureBoot implementation. You can see from the chart that by finding method, there were a total of 35 cases found by code audit and 20 cases found by fuzzing. In terms of attack surfaces, there were 25 cases related to BCD registry processing, 16 cases related to the file system, and 6 cases related to network protocol. And there are 5 cases happening in Windows kernel. During my research, the first challenge I had to address was how to reduce the duplication of my submission. My approach was to consider this from the developer's perspective. First, I would find the bug. Then, I would attempt to write a fuzzer to make it discoverable through fuzzing. And finally, I would conduct hot patching on the vulnerability. If the hot patching was successful, there should be no more cases related to the same root cause. I would repeat these steps until no more crashes could be generated by the fuzzer. Before we dive into the attack surface, there's one key piece of knowledge we should remember before we explore future work on bootloader: the heap management in bootloader. There's no page heap in bootloader compared to that in Windows userland. That means it will not crash as soon as the OOB access happens. Instead, it will crash the next time the corrupt data is used or when the heap management code does garbage collection. I was very surprised to find out that the heap corruption reporting function itself has a self-recursive issue. But it's not important because the stack overflow won't make a heap OOB write easier to exploit in theory. Also, you need to know that the block is at least 32 in bytes and aligned at 32 bytes. So let's go to our next session today, the attack surface in bootloader. We'll begin with an introduction to network protocol. In the bootloader, 4 main network protocols are used, including IPv4 v6 TXT code, HTTP, and WDS multicast protocol. During my research, I found that the protocol stack is the most secure part of the bootloader. I have only found 6 vulnerabilities in the bootloader protocol stack. This includes 2 stack overflows in the PXE bootloader when parsing DHCP v6 response packets, 1 recursive calling when processing TFTP protocol, 1 recursive calling during long chain self-reloading, and 1 integral underflow when processing HTTP response in bootloader. Additionally, there is a denial of service vulnerability assigned a moderate severity in IPv6 protocol stack. From the denial of service, it can be said that the Microsoft bootloader IPv6 code is not yet ready for production. This picture shows you the IPv4 PXE boot stage, and this picture shows you the IPv6. I have been working on implementing this drawing into Python code for a few hours. It is a very good starting point for research reference in the bootloader vulnerability. Before we start looking into the actual case, we need to build an easy-to-reproduce environment for the research. Hyper-V is definitely your good friend for vulnerabilities hunting, as it is the only one that can generate mini-dump without needing to hack the virtual machine. It also supports IPv6 PXE booting on firmware. After searching for documentation, it is easy to find a guide that shows you how to use PowerShell to specify IPv6 for PXE boot selection. You can see that the mini-dump generation code is in the VMWP process. If you want to implement a full dump or make it work in Kernel, the same work needs to be done. I haven't done that because the Hyper-V mini-dump is good enough for the research. You can obtain a very detailed stack trace for the vulnerabilities. Along with a possible root cause analysis, the mini-dump can be helpful in many cases, but it usually won't work when the out-of-bounds override only affects few bytes just after the heap block. You may also prepare a VMware ESXi environment, as VMware is a leader in virtualization in the real world. Now we are going to see the real vulnerabilities in bootloader, starting from a simple stack overflow in the PXE bootloader. The root cause of these two vulnerabilities is that the function failed to detect the client-server identifier length is too large, while the destination array is only 16 bytes long. It is then overrides the variable on the stack of parent function. So this is very simple case, very old school style, yet it presents in bootloader for a very long time. So I think the things we can learn from this is that you need to make sure you haven't missed any components when you look into attack surface. By the way, there's no vulnerabilities only stick to PXE bootloader before. So select a target that hasn't drawn everyone's attention is important. You probably can find easy bug in it, and this can earn you confidence. And I think this is the most important thing when you do the research. Successfully exploitation of these two vulnerabilities will allow the attacker to control RIP and some other registers. The attacker could then initiate ROP. We will discuss why this exploitation is so easy in the later session. We have just discussed network protocol. And next, we are going to talk about BCD element processing vulnerability. There's two talks about BCD registry integer overflow before, so let's be brief. BCD is a registry hub that can be loaded and added by regedit. During my research, the father had only found one vulnerability related to the registry file structure. It's heap OB write in this function. Again, it's very old school. Probably most of you know that Julio from Project Zero has found a very large volume of registry vulnerabilities in Windows kernel in recent years. But registry in bootloader is much simpler. It does not support many features in full version of Windows registry. It's just a simple configuration store place. But a dumb father still can find things in 2023. In registry format person code in bootloader, this is amazing. I won't look into registry person code manually. That's too complex for my level. There's a tool called BCD Edit, which can generate various object templates. It's very useful when you are planning to hunt for bugs in the BCD registry. The usage for BCD Edit is not fully documented. There are some rare usage that you can only find and understand by reverse engineering the BCD Edit code. During my research, I found that the BCD element pages on this website are really helpful. You won't want to miss this material if you truly want to dive deep into researching BCD element processing code in bootloader. In the bootloader, there's a key structure called boot environment device, which reflects the inner binary data of BCD registry element. Through reverse engineering, we see that the binary format data is checked during unpacking, but it seems like the content of binary is not thoroughly checked. And there's a key tab for the boot environment device category, the BL device tab. It's a lighthouse for your research in BCD element processing code. Remember this tab by your heart and take it with you as we move forward. There's an amazing function while they're processing data from BCD registry. Why it's amazing? From its name, you can see that it should be designed to eliminate the illegal device objects from attacker-controlled data. However, this function itself is too vulnerable. It has only had 100 lines of code, and I have found 6 vulnerabilities in it. These include 2 stack overflows, which can override the return address, 1 arbitrary memory write, and 3 heap OOB write. So the dump father generates the first crash in the function, and I reverse the function and find another 2 vulnerabilities and report it to MSRC at very early time of my research into bootloader. Actually, at the beginning of my research into BCD parsing, I don't realize that it is the standard red binary data in the heap file that can be added by regedit. So in front of me is a dump father mutate result. It's a mess. And based on that, the data you can modify is very limited. I think about 1 month later, when I can't find more in bootloader, I realized that the data can be modified by regedit. I came back and to see if there's other vulnerabilities inside this function. And I found 3 more heap OOB write in it. But MSRC told me that this 3 report is a duplicate of an internal report. And that internal report gets CVE 2024-26175 assigned. In fact, this CVE is acknowledged and fixed in April 2024. They clarify that they have implemented a design level change to address them all. So I asked BinDiff, where does the engineering team implement this design level change? And I got 2 different function names with 88% code similarity. So here's my thought. Maybe the engineering team has changed the function name before I report 3 heap OOB case. And when they receive 3 heap OOB reports, they can't find the function name I report anymore. So they explained to me that they are already fixed by a design level change. But this is only my info. Because I'm reporting this case in 2023 and the CVE is released in 2024, I have no idea when I was told it was duplicate. From my previous introduction, you can see that these vulnerabilities are simple. You need only to add boundary check to defend them. It's too simple that the engineering team won't miss it. Came another idea. What if they don't know the 3 report root cause from beginning? So I tried to run the OOB write POC on the patch bootloader, and it did trigger the vulnerabilities I report. It triggered the heap corruption, as you can see on the screen. After reporting this to MSRC, I received a thorough and reasonable explanation for the case duplication. I'd like to specifically thank the MSRC staff for their work throughout this process. I think the most important thing we can learn from this is that if you have large volume of vulnerabilities in same component, be very careful when the patch release. Don't be lazy. Just try your OTOC upon the patched one. I think if I reveal at the time the patch release, perhaps I can have more CVE in the list. The 2 BCD added is only a hint and template for most of my submission. When you dive deeper and try to exploit more complex vulnerabilities, BCD added will be beyond its ability. Here's another example of this situation. Its root cause is a recursive call when emulating the element. Regarding the recursive calling, there's something important you need to know. Unlike userland recursive calling, which usually results in denial of service in userland, in the UEFI environment, it is highly exploitable vulnerabilities. You should be aware of EDK2 UEFI stack memory layout before you see into exploiting stack overflows into bootloader. In the standard EDK2 memory model, the writable memory before the UEFI stack is twice the size as that in Hyper-V. In Hyper-V firmware, although it shares the same stack size as that in UEFI standard, there appears to be a gap that is not writable before the stack memory region. There's no guarantee that the memory before the stack memory is not writable in UEFI definition. So this will change a recursive calling into a stack out-of-bounds write. And this OOB write will have the ability to overwrite the interrupt stack or some key variable in UEFI environment, resulting in a highly exploitable vulnerability. From this image, you can see that when a recursive calling happens in bootloader, it finally overwrites some key variable in the UEFI environment, causing another access violation write. I would appreciate your patience if you try to exploit these vulnerabilities manually. To exploit these vulnerabilities in standard memory layout, you need to include 415 device objects in BCD registry file. Even in the Hyper-V stack memory model, you need to include 226 device objects. In this case, I'd like to emphasize that the importance of writing a program that can help you make your life easier. Because the BCD registry itself is a registry. You can load it and modify it by the registry API on Windows. You can simply write a program like this to test the crash boundary of the recursive calling. Additionally, there's another protocol issue considered here. You can only specify the bootloader using HTTP protocol by leveraging a specific BCD element. Most vulnerabilities are oriented around assumption that the data should be at least a certain length, which is not correct in this case. You need to check the attacker control data against your assumption. OK, we've talked too much about BCD element processing. Let's move on to security policy. That's a very interesting publication document of Microsoft's presentation on UEFI Plugfest. I found two sentences which are very important. As you can see from my previous slide, the last sentence is incorrect. The attack could be carried out by BYOB, bring your own bootloader attack. So the debug policy, its related code still exists in latest Windows bootloader. It seems just like a backdoor, which only with valid Microsoft sign policy can exploit. I can somehow understand why this is by design. When you can have the ability to sign everything correctly, why not sign a bootloader directly? The other one is the only secure feature bypass keys I submit during my research. What I mean is that it is not a memory corruption, it's logical and easy to exploit. This vulnerability exists because the bootloader fetch the boot manager PE file for verification from the boot device. The PE file is already loaded in memory when executing the code. Yet they fetch that again. When the boot is initiated by PXE boot, the remote server cannot be trusted, as it can provide a valid image for verification and an invalid image for real run. The similar talk cases did exist in other products, like mobile phone, but it requires more restricted environment to exploit. So everyone makes mistakes. It's very important to see other research before you really want to take a look into similar components. Last year, Bill from MSRC bring us this question. He said Filesystem is paradise for those who love red fuzzy, and asked why expose so many Filesystem by default. But today, we are not going to talk this unnecessary Filesystem. We are only going to talk about very necessary system for bootloader to work in modern Windows, the Vim and NTFS, and provide some fuzzing tips for the Filesystem. This is another magical example with name fixup in its function name. Previously, we found 6 RCEs in a function name with sanitize in its name. This time, I had identified 5 RCEs in these two functions. Both have the keyword fixup in its name. Again, they are very old school and not very hard to discover when you really take your time looking into the correct function. These findings all begin with a DOM fuzzer for Filesystem in bootloader. Upon reviewing the result list, it turns out that the fuzzer is better at finding and generating denial of service case other than the memory corruption case. It's such a painful thing to analyze denial of service in Filesystem because it has too many of them. And the DOS case in bootloader is moderate severity. Use your time on analysis, the DOS is a kind of waste of time. So here I'll introduce you how to set up a fuzz in Windows bootloader. I start my fuzzing setup with AFL++ NYX mode, because with NYX mode, I don't need to care about the coverage collection. And yes, you'll need a modern Intel processor to run the fuzzer. This is my approach to set up fuzzer code. Add some few sections to hold necessary code and data for fuzzing, and patch the necessary function in bootloader to the fuzz trump line. And about Filesystem fuzzing, there's one key point you should know before you really do it. The Filesystem itself is a code coverage amplifier because fuzzing uses code coverage, a basic block to calculate the code coverage. And to reach the same logic in code, all rows can lead you to room. you will see infinity crash and timeouts due to the same root cause before you really put the correct hot patching into the bootloader. So the fuzzing approach should be as follows. First, you must have an overview of the file system basic idea by reverse engineering and read the documentation. Secondly, you'll need to write a workable fuzzer targeting the specific file system. Then you must conduct hot patching on vulnerabilities. As I mentioned before, if you don't do this, you will see countless unique crash and haunts marked by the fuzzer while they are not truly unique. You can repeat these steps until the fuzzer cannot generate anymore. This approach helped me find out 16 vulnerabilities in 5 days, including 5 found by audit and 11 found by fuzzing. So first image is taken when I make BCD file fuzzing. The down fuzz ran ultra fast, over 3K per second. And for file system fuzzing, it ran much slower because it has large input sample and much complex parsing code. As you can see from this image, even after years of vulnerabilities hunting, this part of code remains fragile, running a simple coverage gap fuzzing resulting in numerous crashes. And there's another tip to accelerate the reproducing of vulnerabilities. You can see on the graph that there are many snapshots that I've made during my research. Actually, there are more snapshots I've made, but when the analysis is done, those snapshots were removed from the list. Snapshots can really accelerate your speed of reproducing and analysis. So next, we are going to talk about how to exploit these vulnerabilities without information leak. Usually, we need an information leak to exploit remote code execution. But there's another important question. Why do I need an information leak to exploit vulnerabilities? You may say that there's ASLR on boot manager. But what if I said that I can bypass ASLR as if it does not exist from start? Here's a trick. Each bootloader by Microsoft has a fixed loading base. The PXE bootloader is not essential. In fact, you can provide the boot manager as a first chain to PXE boot, and the workflow works correctly. You can see in the graph from the mini-dump generated by Hyper-V VM that the bootloader was loaded at a fixed address, and you can perform specific address write and RLP directly. There's no need to leak the bootloader address. You can see on the graph clearly that even SecureBoot can protect victim from the attack because bootloader in the attack is probably signed by Microsoft. I'm not targeting the SecureBoot chain. Nearly all of my findings were targeting memory corruptions in Microsoft bootloader. Ultimately, it can trigger remote code execution on the victim machine, or it can lead to secure feature bypass after the attacker can execute arbitrary shellcode on the victim machine. So we've talked enough about the bootloader. Let's see if there's anything outside the bootloader that will impact the boot security. The PXE architecture problem exposed countless Windows kernel and userland service code to unauthenticated remote attackers, potentially ushering in a new era of unauthenticated RCE attacks on Windows. It's just like this picture shows. The Windows bootloader is just a small piece of the full SecureBoot chain. Any weak point in the deep underwater will render our hard work on fixing SecureBoot's issue not as fruitful as we expected. Today, we are going to introduce a new attack vector that blows the security boundary. Boot security is responsible for verifying loaded executable component, while the Windows kernel ensures the correctness of subsequent configuration and components. This attack method undermines the trust boundary, revealing that the architecture may not have anticipated the potential for this configuration parsing code to be targeted remotely. From an attacker's perspective, exploiting RCE vulnerabilities in bootloader during kernel initialization or post-system boot achieves the same goal, RCE on the victim's machine. Here's the word sounds like. We have a trusted binary. We have a default configuration, reliable system. We have a trusted binary. We have a attacker compromised configuration, a vulnerable system. So the configuration file can be embedded in the Vim image, delivered to the victim remotely. This is crucial. By controlling this configuration file, we can enable non-default components with vulnerable real configuration, potentially exposing the system to attacks. Here's a very simple example. So you can see the golden lock on the screen, which means SecureBoot for this VM is enabled. It's very easy to make this attack. Just use the WDS function provided by Windows Server and a handful tool named DISM++ to modify the Vim image. With this tool, you didn't even have to write one line of code. Just replace the setup executable under Vim image and wait for fish to bat. And if you don't want to wait for fish to bat the bit, you can exploit a Pre-Auth remote denial of service, which is not too hard to find on Windows. In past years, I have found more than 20. But we are not going to talk about DOS today. We're just talking about the possibility of this attack. In PXE environment, a Pre-Auth DOS can cause victim to reboot. And if attacker is already in the adjacent network ready for exploit this kind of bugs, then your PC is under real risk. Now, we are looking beyond vulnerabilities hunting to the broader implications of this research. This slide is from last year's Black Hat, stating that the network boot to user mode is not defensible. Interestingly, they didn't explicitly mention how they would treat network boot to kernel mode. This raises questions about their stance on this attack vector. There are several ways to monitor file rates during system bootup, including procmon and WinDBG kernel debugging with appropriate breakpoint. I have identified a special file rate in winlog and gets used in untouched kernel. Its physical path is in the Windows directory under inf. And this is another paradise for fast lovers. Before we're doing that, we should take a look at what the file looks like. It's that simple, nothing more than a normal in file. But this file parsing is happening in kernel level, which without commonly used API for parsing, because in-file parsing often happens in user space. For my Fuzzing setup, I choose to build upon excellent work of others using Visual KD Redux and my code base. It's very beginner-friendly for kernel programming. The key is to call your Fuzzing setup function at KD debugger initialize 0 and perform your details to the kernel. Since the code we are fuzzing is at a very early initialization stage of untouched kernel, it's not relevant to patch guard. At the time Visual KD KDCOM loads, there's no memory protection for the Windows kernel, allowing you to hook Windows kernel as if you were in user space, and even much simpler. Just load the modified KDCOM build tool provided in Visual KD Redux, and then you can begin your fuzzing. Taking a closer look at the crash found by the fuzzer, what initially appeared to be non-pointer dereference turned out to be more complex. So there's another sample. The fuzzer only found denial of service at first, and I do the reverse engineering on the point where it crashed. Later, I found out the first Windows kernel memory corruption in my career. Another small allocation and OOB right after. The POC file is pretty large, so I write a Python code to generate it. In practice, it seems like they also consider network to kernel mode as indefensible. This becomes particularly interesting because the reason they gave me for closing my case is that victim user data didn't get compromised when this attack happened. But the truth is, the victim is executing the unsigned code at kernel level. I believe it's much simpler to erase all data or just do what the ransomware do an encryption on top of the bootloader encrypted data. Is there any necessary for the data to be leaked? We can learn from the past that this kind of attack should be enough for the bad guys. So we are nearing our journey ends. Let's see what we can do in the future and takeaways. The next step should be to continue research on the bootloader on other attack surfaces, such as other bootloader designed to be loaded by boot manager, like Windows Resume or Hyper-V bootloader. Additionally, the Windows kernel and userland service is also very interesting because I just told you that it could be exploited through the feature. So there's one more interesting thing. It's about the second breaches we are booting into. So PCA 2023 at 261 100 is identical thing right now. But I found this, there's 5 of my findings. They are fixed, it's not shipped in PCA 2011 branch, which means even with the latest operating system patch, the system version before 26100 is still vulnerable to these 5 vulnerabilities. This is amazing, so you really should take a look at Microsoft's KB article about these vulnerabilities. If you are running Windows 22.2 or before, or Windows 11 23H2, and you didn't switch your bootloader to PCA 2023 manually, you are vulnerable to my finding. So back to my topic title, now you know that there's 2 breaches for us to boot into by default right now. One is PCA 2011 temp breaches. These breaches make nearly every PC with UEFI SecureBoot enabled exploitable by default to all my findings. One is patch branch breaches, which makes you exploitable by default, even if you update to the latest operating system patch. And the takeaways, first is BYOB to achieve remote attacks in bootloader. A small function with sanitize or fix up in its name could be very vulnerable. And recursive calling could be exploitable to RCE in UEFI environment. And check twice after your patch is released, especially when you have found vulnerabilities in same component at a very large volume. Don't be lazy. Take a closer look at the code if further can generate DOS. And out-of-scope vulnerabilities could also be interesting in real world. And take further action immediately to fix these SecureBoot vulnerabilities. Again, we need to bring this slide back again. When the product line is big enough, you'll have a lot of departments for different components. And the question here is, traditionally, there's many attack surfaces should not be exposed. In our attack scenario, there's no duty for bootloader to check this configuration file, and yet there's few reasons for OS security team to process this attack surface that is unreachable through the common way. And I did provide a suggest to MSRC that to implement a simple recheck for multiple WDS server exists in same network, and that should make the attack scenario harder. And MSRC told me it's not a security feature can be shipped within recent update. Till now, I'm not seeing this mitigation be implemented in bootloader. It seems like this still has a long way to go before the attack scenario really getting resolved. And at the end, I'll provide you an online open source web page to detect SecureBoot's data. Compared to KB articles, this can give you a better view about how deeply you are impacted by my findings. And the data, as you can see, the symbol count is pretty small. You might want to test it for yourself. I will keep updating the collect data on GitHub. If you have any questions, please find me on X. That's all. And thank you for your time listening to my talk.